Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. I hope everyone's staying safe. I hope everyone's staying healthy. In the midst of all of this, while quarantine's happening, content just keeps coming out. And I'm going to talk to you today about the new show from producer Ryan Murphy called Hollywood, right after the jump. If you're not already a part of the team, go ahead and ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you'll be the first to know about it. Share, like, love, let everybody know about the place, all right? Now let's get into Hollywood. For those of you who are not familiar with who Ryan Murphy is, he is a producer who has produced such things as Glee, Scream Queens, American Horror Story, American Crime Story, both the OJ one and the Versace ones. He's got a huge range of hits. He is what we would call one of the super producers. For me, I have like the four horsemen of producers, super producers for television. It would be Dick Wolf, Greg Berlanti, Shonda Rhimes, and Ryan Murphy. Chuck Lorre would be in there for doing comedy, but drama wise, those are the four. And so they all have massive first look and multi content deals with specific studios. Universal's with Dick Wolf, Greg Berlanti's with Warner Brothers, and HBO Max, and then Shonda and Ryan are with Netflix. So Netflix has a lot of investments. This is his second straight to series Netflix show. He has other stuff that's on Netflix, but it was aired somewhere else first and ported over. So he has a lot going for this show. So for those who don't know, Hollywood is this new series from Ryan Murphy about Hollywood post World War II, which sort of uses an alternate look and goes while everything's going straight in the normal timeline and the alternate timeline. What if we rewrote history and kind of dismantled all the things that dealt with racism and homophobia and sexism and classism at the time through the lens of old school Hollywood? It is very Ryan Murphy. Take that as the good or the bad. But it's a mixed bag for me, and I'm going to kind of go through this and give you my thoughts on the show as a whole. I think the show looks beautiful. It's gorgeously shot. Obviously, you're using some Paramount lots and you're using stuff and just changing things around, but I think it feels this. The first thing that this show has to do and get correctly is getting the feel of that world. The gas station, everything all feels like it's a lived in and breathed in and good looking world to be a part of. It feels very much like old school Hollywood. If you ever have spent time looking up any of that stuff that used to exist in Hollywood, this is what it sort of physically looked like. And I think they nailed that and get that down. I think the show is super well intentioned and has its heart on its sleeve and it's doing everything to kind of get these messages across. I think it is very important to have a show that says they were doing it wrong all this time. And all this time, there should have been people that look like me or look like an Asian woman or look like someone who is gay. They should be represented on screen so that little kids who are growing up have a representation of all of that they see within themselves on screen, so it doesn't look like the norm or what's allowed or what's societally accepted looks like just a straight white man. That is what the intention of the show is doing, and I think the point of that gets is there and it gets across and it's delivered. Whether it's well delivered, I'll talk about in a second. I think the casting in this movie, I think the casting in this series is spectacular from top to bottom. I don't think there's really a weak link in it. There's no one I can point to say they're phoning it in or they're half-assing it or they don't fit the character that I think that they're trying to play. There are a few that I think go heads and shoulders above everyone else. I think Jim Parsons is freaking amazing, stunning. Like whatever he's doing in this, they need to bottle up a couple of scenes and send that off to the indie board because he is phenomenal. I never watched the Sheldon show. I never watched that, but I've seen clips of what his performances are on that. This was completely unrecognizable. And for me, the big thing with him, without his character throughout all 7 episodes, is that he is essentially the antagonist for the most part. Society as a whole is one antagonist, but he is a antagonist to a certain amount of people. Um, but he plays it in a way that, like, yes, you hate him, you know everything that he's doing is vile, but you can't take your eyes off of him. And he also plays it in a way that you question whether or not the times that he's being open emotionally, because he tricks you so many times, you don't know if he's being sincere or if he's being fake. And I think that's just fascinating to play with. You could tell he was having a ball with it, and I think he makes that character his own. And Henry is despicable, but also so it's just so much meat on that bone. Um, I think an agent of that time probably does fit a lot of the stereotypes that he does. Might be heightened to 10, might not be. That's the scary thing about some of this show. Some things are played super height, and I don't know if they're that far off, which is kind of sad. I also think Patti LuPone, I'm familiar with her because I do like Broadway. She's phenomenal in this. Her character has probably the biggest start to finish arc. Actually, she does have the biggest start to finish arc, now that I think about it, in the entire series. Her character is introduced in the first episode, and you get where her payoff is at the very end, and she goes through the biggest journey of anybody else on this entire show. Um, and it's good to see her at her lowest, her highest, and there are moments when she kind of gets knocked back down, that you can just see the emotion on her face of where she is and where uh, that world has sort of put her in her place as a woman. It's I don't want to spoil. I'm not going to spoil too much of the show, but I think everything that she does is spectacular. And the third person that I really love is Dylan McDermott. And it's weird because the first two episodes I thought he was in a different show than everybody else. I felt it might have been too much and too over the top. And then once he was sort of the gateway to showing you what the style of the show is. And if you can accept him, and then he goes away for a little bit, and when he comes back, and he's a little, everything else is sort of caught up to his heightened uh, screen time or his heightened performance, that it all sort of gels and works together. So Dylan McDermott has the unfortunate thing for me as being the person that I was like, oh, I don't like what you're doing, and then it grew to being such a nuanced and layered character that I'm like, oh, I get it now. What did not quite work for me for this show is that it is both not subtle at all. It is very heavy-handed, and it's but at the same time, it is also super super safe, which is fascinating that those two gel together. I'm gonna give a couple of examples. There's a device used in the very last episode of the show that almost made me want to vomit. It's the use, and I get why they're doing it. Is it makes sense if certain things have been laid out or this device has been used before. So in the very last scene, one of our characters who is probably going through the most challenges historically at this time, is sort of the representation for all people of like skin color or like tone, and they are up for an award, and the show. I'm not going to tell you how whether or not that person wins or loses, but what happens is while that award is they're saying their name and they're announcing, they cut away to a family of African Americans or a family of Asians or a family of um, uh, homosexual or closeted, unfortunately, at that time, homosexuals to listen to see who wins. And it's very much a heartstring moment, like, oh my God, this person now is representing all of whatever that town or whatever that ethnic background is feeling. But it feels very ham-fisted because that one has never been used before, and two, we never at any point in time go outside of this world to see how others are affected by this. We just see how they are affected. So to do that in the very last episode is like, cool, now we're hitting home this message, but I think there might have been a little bit more subtle ways to do that, or to do that early. I also think it's not subtle. I think the point is, I think we get the point, is saying we need to be inclusive in Hollywood. We need to be all inclusive and everyone needs to be. The way that the winning team of who wins the Oscars for the film that is produced throughout Hollywood, it's hilarious to me. It's very on the nose because you literally have all the people of color or all the women winning and the people who are straight white men not. I get it, guys. You don't have to beat me over the face with it. There's a little bit more subtlety that can be used. There's a lot more examples throughout the show. I don't know if this is a Ryan Murphy trope. I don't watch all of his shows. I'm familiar with the crime story and horror story stuff, but Glee I never got into, so I don't know if this is a style to be sort of this over the head, but it sort of rubs me the wrong way. But my other thing is, when I say safe, there are a couple of moments when they actively choose not to lean into the hate. And I think, case in point, there's a phone call when our leading African American woman gets a big part. and it's like society. It's a big thing. It gets in the news, and she starts getting death threats. The death threats we only hear her responding to them. We don't hear the other side. There's a point where her husband, who is not African American, who's white and slash half Filipino, says that did they say they don't even get to the point where they say the word the N word. They just say, did they say? She's like, yes, and he says yes. Here's my thing. I get if you're trying to appease the masses, but if you're doing something where you're trying to tell an alternate world, in that alternate world, you kind of also should show us what that world actually looked like and say, instead of going that way, we turned and made an active decision to go this way. Without seeing how dirty and how grimy and how rough that life is, it's kind of hard for me to be okay with how happy and serene and how cotton candy everything is. I need some of the dirt and grime to get to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, that's glad we're not there. I'm not saying throw in words left and right. I'm not, but there needs to be some type of, oh my god, these people are that side looks really bad. We don't want to be doing that. I'd rather return to do that. And it's just a weird thing that you can be both not subtle, heavy-handed with your messaging, but also kind of take the teeth out of everything that actually existed in that world. And it's sort of a serene world like that. It looks beautiful, but it's hollow. Like there's nothing on either side. Like it can't be both super saccharine and not have any type of the meat or the weight of what actually happened in this world. Like there are interracial couples. There's the thought of like that. Just yes, that's the world we want to live in, but they happen so easy in the show that it kind of just makes me forget like this doesn't quite work that way. You need to have some type of combativeness to get to the rainbow at the end. So that leads me to the next point, which is Laura Harrier, who plays Camille Washington, who is you may most recognize her from Spider-Man Homecoming or Black Klansman. She plays a woman who's of African American descent, who is the first person to get a African American leading job at this production company. And at that time, that's a huge thing. Post World War, obviously, things were a little grimy. Not according to the show, but in life, that's how they were. Not as accepting. So she is the impetus for all of the social change that is being thrown upon the world in this bubble of a world. The problem is we don't get her actively on screen until the third episode, really. First two episodes focus mostly on the straight white male character, whereas she is the impetus for the entire show and is given the most meat on the back end, specifically a speech that I think you would care more about if you knew more about her backstory. Unfortunately, Camille is just the black eye candy to kind of get the story going. We don't know anything about her. We don't know much about her until her speech. She starts giving up stuff about her past and who her parents are in the speech. But at that point, it's the last episode of the show. None of this season anyway. None of that really holds any weight. I'd rather see it than you tell it to me in 5 minutes. The majority of the backstory that we get about black people in this world is via Hattie McDaniel, played by Queen Latifah, which is fine because I'm getting what it means to be black in the world overall at this time for a woman who had already won an Oscar, and how she wasn't allowed to be in some rooms just being black, even though she was already quote unquote on. And you get to see like how Camille has to fight for lines and doing things the Hattie way as opposed to her own way, because she's not the first black. They want her to be like, oh, instead of being you, be this. Fine and dandy. I still don't know who she is. By the end of this, I don't know anything about her. I know some things because of the speech, but I feel like there was a better way to flesh out that character as opposed to spending so much time on characters that in the end don't mean that much to the entire arc of the story. Which is, I think, my biggest issue with this show. And why it becomes a super mixed bag. There are just too many damn characters on the board for this show. In a 7-episode run, we have about 6 or 7 main characters with about 5 important recurring characters, and they all sort of do a comedy of errors and intertwine in some way or another. And it just becomes very convoluted and muddy. And I don't really have, at the end of this, I don't have one clear A story that made me feel all the way throughout, and that sucks because I know what they were going for, and there's some points of it where that last episode hits, but I think it could be stronger if you pulled out 2 pairs of characters and kind of condensed it down. If nothing else, in your 7 episodes, spend an entire episode on just one character as opposed to doing about 4 in one. When you start mixing it, it just becomes very herky-jerky, and I never can, for me, I can never personally attach to any one character because there's so much being told to me that I just feel like it becomes muddled and messy, and it sucks. So there's a lot of things that I do like, but there's just a lot. I'm just like, oh, this wasn't necessary, or we could have gotten here another way, or we could have hit that a little bit harder. And when you're on Netflix, like this show probably would be fine on like Fox or ABC. When you're on Netflix, you have the wherewithal to be a little bit more grittier and a little grimier. I just don't know if being this clean was necessary. In fact, I just think the important A story should have been Darren Criss being a white / Asian director and him in an interracial couple with Camille. Like, that's your jump off point, not Jack, who I don't know if his character really served a purpose other than being an entry point. I feel like your entry point for this type of series, if you're trying to attack racial justice, you're trying to attack sexism, you're trying to attack homophobia and classism, you should probably start your show with either the interracial couple with a black female or the black writer who has to change things, change who he is, or change what he's doing to kind of get in. I think they missed a mark, and because of that, their landing kind of just feels a little hollow overall. Not to go into it so much, because I don't know if it's just sort of the way that you have to do it at this point in time, because there's not that many black people on the board, but it does sort of get into that white savior moment a little bit while they're making active decisions to put in place, and you kind of just spend an entire episode seeing black people say thank you. Which feels weird. But at the same time, that is kind of how that has to happen for things to open up. It just, I think because we don't have enough of the backstory for those characters or for the homosexual characters, that some of that just feels like you're placating more than you are actually having a one-on-one conversation with those people. And I know on the back end, it seemed like I did not like this show. I think it's fine. I don't know. I wouldn't recommend this to a lot of people. I think it's a beautiful show. I think if you are a fan of old school Hollywood and just Hollywood or Ryan Murphy shows as a whole, you definitely need to check it out. For me, there are things where it's such a mixed bag. If I could take elements out of it, yes, I would recommend. But as a whole, I think there are some other things that you could watch. But I will say this, because this is how it was for me. If you can get through the first 2 episodes and you really find yourself like enthralled and you want to keep going, binge through. It's an easy watch. You'll have fun. You'll have a good time. It won't be too hard hitting. You might even shed a tear if you are a person of one of these other ethnic backgrounds or sexual orientation. But if you want something with a little bit more meat on the bones, a little bit more weightier, that is telling you a bigger message, or telling you a bigger message done with a little bit more opposition, and it's not so easy for everybody, you might want to watch something else. I don't think this is a show done to break down the societal norms for the people who have those norms needing to be broken down. I think this is a show to break down the societal norms by people who are white. And so some of the heft and weight of what you actually go through. Now, there are some episodes, I do know that 2 episodes of this were written by a person of color, and they actually feel the most, you get the most weight in them. I just wish they jive with the rest of the show. Because I don't know, the show has a hard time jumping from what's real and what's not. And when you do that, some of the things that are allowed to happen in this show just would not have happened at that point in time. And so it's hard to see when this show begins and when real life didn't, and the merging of the two. Because you can't tell me that Hattie could not get into her Oscar ceremony, but then say that it's perfectly fine to have an interracial couple and no one bats an eye. But those are my thoughts. What did you guys think about Hollywood? Did you finish it? What are your thoughts? Go ahead and leave your comments in the comments below. If you haven't, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI, or you can hit me up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast by the same name that is on Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. This current episode, we're going to be talking about what would have been Black Widow had it been here, as well as the new tiff that our parents are having with Universal and AMC saying, we're not playing together anymore. But those are my thoughts. Everyone stay safe, be healthy, and I'll see you next time.